Baker Mayfield. He reminds me of a shorter version of Brett Favre. He can throw it. He's very confident. He's not afraid whatsoever.
Another guy that isn't getting nearly as much attention as I believe he should be is Florida international receiver T.Y. Hilton. 6 returns over his career, combining kick and punt returns for touchdowns.
He has the mindset, and he has the intelligence, and he understands the offense to a T. Kirk's our quarterback. We could have done a deal right then and got it for long term and been a slam dunk.
Sam is a good football player. The problem is he's not a great football player, and that's so we're bringing so much attention to a guy that, frankly, is a day 3 prospect.
And now, the Instinctive Scouting Podcast, featuring 2-time NFL General Manager Scot McCloughan and NFLDraftScout.com Senior Analyst Rob Rang.
Hi, and welcome to the Instinctive Scouting Podcast, starring 2-time NFL General Manager Scot McCloughan and myself, Rob Rang, Senior Analyst for NFLDraftScout.com. The big news in the world of football this week, Scott, is the NFL's trade deadline, and we've already seen 2 recent top 10 draft picks get traded, with the Dallas Cowboys acquiring wideout Amari Cooper from the Raiders for a 2019 first-round pick, and the New Orleans Saints boosting their secondary by shipping a 2019 fourth-round pick and a 2020 seventh-round pick to the Giants for cornerback Eli Apple. So first off, just some first impressions. What did you think about these trades, looking at it from the teams who acquired players? So let's start off with the Dallas Cowboys. Do you like this move for the Cowboys to get Amari Cooper?
You know what? Yeah, from the standpoint that he's on his rookie deal still, and he's young.
Yeah, 24.
But he's, with the Raiders now, they've shipped off 2 first-round picks that are both young. And, you can get all the picks you want in the future, which is great if you nail them. But if you miss on them, you're losing 2 proven players in the NFL. So, from Dallas' standpoint, I think it's smart because, they don't have a 1. They don't have, and not saying Amari's been playing really well this year or even last year. He started off out of the box as a rookie in his second year really good. But, you're still getting a young guy on a cheaper deal, but you're also losing a draft pick, a first-round draft pick. But, yeah, I like it. I like it from Dallas' standpoint because why not take a run at it? And apparently the Raiders are trying to play their game right now is just accumulate so many picks they possibly can and just hopefully draft well.
Yeah, I think it makes some sense from the Cowboys' perspective. I mean, to me, this is not so much a trade about Amari Cooper. Obviously, he's the player that they acquired, but I really think this is a trade all about Dak Prescott and trying to identify if he really is your quarterback of the future. As you mentioned with Amari Cooper, a young player like Prescott who is going to be looking to get that second contract. And so I think the Cowboys have to figure out what they have in Prescott or potentially start looking for another quarterback. And as you mentioned, Scott, the Cowboys don't have a number 1 receiver, and Amari Cooper could potentially be that. I mean, I certainly expected him to become a superstar in the NFL. Of course, he was number 4 overall pick by the Raiders that year as far as being the elite wide receiver in that draft class. But at the same time, a first-round pick is heavy spending. And, you're talking about a receiver here who only has another year left, has struggled a little bit with injuries, another year left on his contract, I should say. And so, there is definitely some risk involved here. Anytime you're going to make a trade for a player who only has a year remaining on his contract, you're gambling heavy that you're going to be able to re-sign this player. There's going to be a lot of angry Cowboys fans out there if Jerry Jones or Stephen Jones or whoever you want to say, if they ship that first-round draft pick over and they're not able to re-sign Amari Cooper long-term and he ends up being the player that they hope he is, then obviously that's a risk from the Cowboys' perspective as well. So I think it's a fascinating decision. I've always been a fan of teams who are aggressive. And so I like the move from that regard. But at the same time, I also don't think that it's the slam dunk, great move for the Cowboys that maybe some are perceiving because Amari Cooper was so productive in college. And that's really where I wanted to, unless you had any other thoughts on that, I wanted to kind of go into what you remember of Amari Cooper and when you were Sky. I mean, you may recall you were in charge of the Washington Redskins, obviously a division rival. You had the 5th overall pick that year, and you selected Brandon Scherf, who for my money, maybe with the exception of the running backs Todd Gurley and Melvin Gordon, Brandon Scherf has been one of the real studs of that draft. Amari Cooper has not been so successful. So I don't know how closely you considered Cooper at number 5 overall, had he been there for you when you were in charge of the Redskins. But what do you recall of him, and where do you think some of his strengths and weaknesses and how that might apply to Dallas Cowboys?
I thought he was a stud. I thought he was very, very talented. You could put any game on. Didn't matter. Good competition, bad competition, did not matter. He dominated. He completely dominated. I thought he'd be a lights-out NFL football player. And he started off being really, really good. Now, like I said, the last 2 years, I think this year he's got, 22 catches or something. And that's not all on him. That's on the quarterback.
Certainly. That's
on the offensive scheme, all that stuff. But, I thought he was going to be an excellent NFL football player, and when the Raiders took him, I called my brother, of course, who works for the Raiders, and said that's a great pick. That's a great pick, and I don't hate anything, but I dislike taking receivers in the first round unless, they're so special that you couldn't believe what you watch on tape. Yeah, I thought he was one of those guys that you could take him in the first round and he's going to be an impact player right away, which he was. He had a great rookie year. Now I think his strengths are speed, quickness, ability to run routes. The thing I'm surprised with, which really big time surprises me, is effective drop balls.
Exactly.
Because in college he didn't have that. I mean, he caught everything in sight.
Well, I'm happy you mentioned that because I 100% agree. I mean, I thought that he was a terrific athlete. The speed, the quickness. I loved his route running ability. But yeah, to me, the number one thing that I underlined in my scouting report, Amari Cooper, is he had what I call Hoover hands, and I just mean that like almost like a vacuum cleaner. I mean, his ability is kind of suck the ball out of the air and make that reception, put the ball away cleanly, and keep moving forward. I really thought made him special. And so I agree with you. I mean, we see all these statistics out there that Amari Cooper is among the league leader in drops for the last couple of years now. Is a surprising number. And, I mentioned before, I think this might be a little bit of a trade about Dak Prescott. For my money, I thought that Derek Carr, at least when he left Fresno State and got drafted by the Raiders and early on in his career, I would argue that he is among the more accurate quarterbacks in the entire NFL. Maybe not the most durable, maybe not the toughest. You can make whatever arguments you want, but accuracy, when he's protected, I think he's a very accurate passer. So that's one of the reasons that surprises me that Amari Cooper has the drops that he has. Whereas Dak Prescott, on the other hand, when he's hot, he's very accurate. But there are plenty of times where Dak Prescott is not hot. And so I don't know that this necessarily is going to again be that slam dunk move for the Cowboys, because I don't know that suddenly Amari Cooper's Hoover hands are going to return. And so one last thought I want to mention about this wide receiver class is, to me, one of the exercises I try to do every year after we get past the draft a couple of years, I look back and I say, okay, if there was a player who maybe has not reached our expectations, and obviously the expectations are sky high. We're talking about a player drafted number 4 overall. But I do think it's important to kind of remember this. I'm just going to list you the 5 different wide receivers, Scott, who were drafted in the first round in 2015. I think you were a pretty wise man to go with that, Brandon Scherf. But number 4 overall, Amari Cooper, and we talked about him and what he's done with the Raiders and, what he may do with the Cowboys in the future. Number 7 overall was Kevin White. Chicago Bears obviously has not been as productive as they hoped. Number 14 overall, Devontae Parker with the Miami Dolphins. Number 20 overall, who's come into his own here recently, but certainly looked bad early, Nelson Aguilar for the Philadelphia Eagles. And at number 20, there's 6 receivers. Number 26 overall, Brashad Perryman with the Baltimore Ravens. And then Philip Dorsett with the Indianapolis Colts at number 29 overall. So, I think it's easy to see why Amari Cooper was our top-rated wide receiver in that draft class, but it wasn't a very good receiver draft class. So I think that also is something to kind of keep in mind. And it goes back to your point, Scott, about why you don't necessarily want to say you hate drafting wide receivers in the first round. I'll tell you what, the bust rate on wide receivers really is troubling.
Oh, it's incredible. It's incredible. I knew 2 months before the draft who I was taking, because you know what? Big body, great guy, tough guy, smart guy, power guy, and it's so much less miss on those type of guys, so offensive lineman, defensive lineman, where you want to say, compared to receiver or corner, because there's just, there's so many factors go into being a receiver, being a corner, being whatever. But being an O lineman, being a D lineman, being a tough guy from a great family that's smart and tough and competitive and passionate, you can't miss on those guys. Even if you do miss, you still hit, because they're going to play for multiple years.
Well, and I agree with you. That's one of the reasons why I still think that's the safe way to go, is along the line of scrimmage and with tough guys. And, we've talked a lot about that in the past. And so I wanted to have kind of a similar conversation, about what the New Orleans Saints now have with their cornerback Eli Apple. So same kind of thing. I'm going to ask you basically just your first impression from the Saints' perspective, and then maybe what you remember of Eli Apple, who was drafted a year later in 2016, 10th overall by the New York Giants.
Yeah, good player. Ohio State, solid coaching staff, solid technique. You always wish he was bigger, but that's okay. Denzel Ward's not big. Cleveland's playing with him. He's playing very well.
Yes, he is.
With Apple, it's been unique because there's something missing right now, and I don't know what it is. Because he's played, of course, in college, big-time games. He's played, of course, in pro ball, big-time games. He just hasn't stepped up. He just hasn't made the next step. And, it's not so much speed and quickness. I think it's just mentality. I think it's just feeling the game and reading the game, mentally. And I think that there's something that's not going on right now. And, when he came out, I thought he'd be a good player. Where he went, no, I didn't think that. I thought sure he went later, but still not much later. He's a talented guy, but there's just something that's not clicking right now.
Well, I agree with you. And I think part of the reason why things aren't clicking is I think that the New York Giants are a team that when they've been successful in the past, and Scott, you and I have talked about this a little bit in previous episodes, ISP, when we talked about Eli Manning. But when the Giants have been great in the past, they've had a terrific pass rush. And if you take away that pass rush, then suddenly corners look a little bit more mortal. And, certainly at Ohio State, Eli Apple had the advantage of a huge pass rush behind him. He had terrific linebackers and safeties. The Buckeyes are as gifted every year as any team in the country, and so like you, I had Eli Apple as a solid first-round pick. I certainly can't claim that, but I did think that he went a little earlier, than he should have. Now, that said, I'm going to do the exact same thing I did before. You look at the defensive back class that year, then you had an absolute superstar go number 5 overall, Jalen Ramsey, and he's been everything and more that was expected. But then Eli Apple was the second defensive back come off the board, number 10. Vernon Hargreaves went to number 11 overall to the Bucs. He was a player that, frankly, I was higher on than Eli Apple, but Vernon Hargreaves hasn't been any type of real consistent player for Tampa Bay. So it kind of shows you that this is a class that maybe is starting to struggle once you got past Jalen Ramsey. The next defensive back off the board, Carl Joseph from those aforementioned Raiders, has been benched in Oakland, for a while here. Keanu Neal in Atlanta, big hitter for the Falcons, but at the same time has struggled with durability himself. Something not unexpected for a guy who hits the way he does. William Jackson III, went number 24 overall to the